Jack Callahan's horse faltered at the edge of a narrow trail carved into the scorched earth. The rider's gaze locked onto a sight so harrowing, it tore at the stoic walls he'd built through years of blood and dust. The horror settled like a heavy stone in Jack's chest, each breath catching as he stared, unable to turn away. The desert stretched out boundless under a blistering sun that seemed to scorch not only the land, but the soul itself. Cactus needles glittered with the harsh light. The cracked soil whispered of drought and neglect. A silent stillness wrapped the area, shattered only by the brittle rustling of dead leaves clinging to brittle branches. The air was thick and stifling, smelling faintly of sun-baked dust mixed with a hint of scorched leather and distant sagebrush. Somewhere far off, the faint clatter of hooves echoed, an uneasy rhythm against the oppressive quiet. Jack sat rigid in his saddle, the weight of solitude pressing on him like the relentless heat. Years on the frontier had carved into him a hardness, battle scars etched deep beneath weathered skin and cold eyes. Yet here in this moment, that toughness recoiled in silent revolt. His jaw clenched as the image before him gnawed at something buried, a flicker of honor, an ember of justice undimmed despite the harshness of his path. He thought of the countless lives broken by prejudice, the endless toll of cruelty sown between these barren hills. Here, this young woman's defiance had not brought freedom, but death more savage than the wilderness itself. His eyes traced the signs of desperate resistance, the bruised bark beneath torn fabric, faint scrapes where desperate fingers must have clawed for life, broken branches strewn as if a struggle had carved itself into the earth only moments before. The brutality was raw, unforgiving. To Jack, it was not merely hate's handiwork, but a grim reminder of a conflict far greater than isolated violence, a deep wound in a land torn apart by fear and hatred, where justice often hung from trees as a warning to the defiant. Suddenly, movement flickered at the periphery of his vision, a scattered shadow among the thickets. His heart surged as the distinct shapes of men emerged, armed and purposeful, approaching the cursed tree. Their measured steps stirred the dust and shattered the fragile silence that had cloaked the scene. Time contracted, each second thick with the threat of violence or the need for swift escape. Jack's hand tightened around the worn reins, his senses sharpening. The weight of choice pressed upon him. Stand and confront this horror, or vanish into the wasteland's embrace. The world narrowed to this suspended moment, the scent of dust and sweat mingling with the acrid memory of gunpowder. His eyes locked on the advancing figures, breaths drawn shallow, muscles coiled like the spring of a rattler ready to strike. The frontier's unforgiving nature had never felt so immediate, so alive, as in this clash of past cruelty and uncertain future. Jack's shadow stretched long beneath the brutal sun, poised on the precipice of fate. Se inscreva agora e junte-se a nós nesta jornada pela fronteira sombria, onde o destino dos corajosos se desenha entre a coragem e o sacrifício. Não deixe que esta história se desvaneça como pó do deserto, seja parte da lenda que seguirá contada até o último suspiro deste velho oeste implacável. Jack's breath hitched as he melted into the gnarled shadows cast by the dry underbrush. The approaching figures, 5 men, rugged faces cloaked in the dust and bitterness of the frontier, stomped deliberately toward the cruel spectacle. Their eyes flicked imperiously over the crucified woman, lips curling in grim satisfaction. Jack's fingers tightened around the worn leather of his saddle, heart pummeling against ribs dulled by years of violence, but now stirred anew, a flicker of righteous fury threatening to blaze. The men paused briefly, muttering in low tones. One knelt, tracing the crude carving on the wooden sign. She refused to marry white. A bitter sneer cracked the man's weathered face. Others fussed over trampled brush and broken twigs, silent witnesses to a desperate fight that had ended here, between the rooted earth and the torment inflicted by narrow minds. Jack's eyes scanned the area swiftly. Bruises darkened the bark beneath the woman's wrists. Torn fragments of cloth fluttered, evidence of a struggle against some cruel fate. A sharpened stick lay discarded, splintered and stained. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of dust, leather sweat, and a faint copper tang he dreaded. He knew the men were locals, settlers bound to these parched lands by greed and fear. Men who believed power came from cruelty, who viewed the Apache presence as a threat to their claim. But Jack's code, buried deep beneath scars and solitude, did not tolerate such injustice. The group lingered too long for his liking, voices now rising in coarse laughter, praising their own savagery with bravado. One of them kicked at the earth near the foot of the tree, scattering dry leaves like forgotten prayers. Jack's gaze hardened. It was time. He could not stand idly by. Careful not to stir the dust or snap a twig, he slipped farther into the thicket, gloved hands reaching out to the fallen wrist of the woman. There, a delicate cuff bracelet caught the sun's merciless glare. A simple band of beaten silver, etched with patterns faint but meaningful. She had worn it as a token, a symbol of heritage and hope. He grasped the bracelet gently, his fingers brushing against the cold metal as if he could draw strength from it. A silent vow formed in the dry heat of his chest. Her death would not be forgotten. She deserved dignity in death as she had fought fiercely in life. Jack traced the path beyond the clearing, eyes narrowing at a set of fresh footprints in the soft soil, small, hurried, and leading westward toward the jagged silhouette of a distant ridge. They weren't far from a nearby Apache village, rumored to survive beyond the oppressive reach of settlers. The faint marks of an ambush scarred the ground nearby. Broken arrows, broken weapons, scattered in burnt brush. The air hummed with the echoes of violence, like a ghost lamenting the cost of survival. Pressed to act before the hunters returned, or worse, Jack swung down from his saddle, shadow merging with the tree line as he followed the trace. Each step was measured, every rustle potentially betraying him. But his purpose surged stronger than fear. To seek her family, to bring meaning to her sacrifice, that was his beacon in this wilderness of cruelty. The sun dipped lower, the horizon bleeding amber and crimson, casting long shadows over the cracked earth. Jack's eyes caught glimmers of smoke curling sluggishly from the ravaged village below. The remnants of fire, the smell of charred wood and scorched earth stirred deeper instincts, pain and resilience intertwined. The land itself seemed to hold its breath. He crouched behind a ridge, surveying the devastation etched upon the modest cluster of dwellings. Toppled huts, splintered wood, scarred earth. The lifeblood of a people, battered but unbroken. Silence pressed overwhelmingly here, punctuated only by distant restless winds or the mournful cry of a lone coyote. Somewhere within, survivors still clung to the fragile threads of hope. Jack's pulse thudded in his ears as he spotted boot prints converging on the outskirts. Signs some had fled in haste, while others had fought too close to dawn, leaving behind a trail marked with blood and whispered secrets. His gaze hardened with grim determination. The truth of this assault would not remain buried. The weight of the silver bracelet in his palm grounded him. This woman, her courage, her defiance, had etched a line in the sand. Her story demanded reckoning. Jack's resolve hardened like the forgotten stones beneath the desert sun. Their fight was no longer one of survival alone, but a call to justice darkened by hatred and unspoken scars. A low rustling shifted nearby. Jack froze, senses alert, hand resting instinctively on the grip of his revolver, hidden beneath his coat. Between the sparse brush, a slender figure emerged. Wild eyes, dark hair tangled with dust. Her presence at once wary and fierce. She flinched at first sight, startled by the stranger, but not without fierce courage. Jack met her gaze, a silent exchange loaded with suspicion and something fragile, almost recognizing. She bore the same lines of battle and loss etched on the land, eyes tempered by grief but flickering with unyielding spirit. Underneath the shared wounds, a silent pact began to form, words unnecessary in this tense moment. Behind her, the burnt remains of what he surmised was the woman crucified's home, her family's. Naya, the young Apache woman, stood amidst the ashes of her past and the uncertain promise of an uneasy future. Jack's throat tightened, voice a low growl. "I found this," he said, revealing the bracelet. "Your sister, she didn't die without someone to remember her." Naya's eyes darkened, the tightness in her jaw betraying the storm beneath her steadfast facade. She reached out, fingers trembling, and took the silver token. The smallest ghost of a nod hinted at fragile trust. A distant howl, torn from the wind, reminded them both the threat still loomed. Jack's gaze shifted to the horizon, where curling smoke met open sky. "This was no random act," he said sharply. "There's more waiting for you all." Naya's fists clenched. "They mean to finish what?" They started. Jack didn't answer. Instead, he scanned the earth once more, catching the imprint of broken soil and bruised grass, a massacre's spore. "And I'm coming with you." As the last amber light fled the land, shadows deepened, swallowing the ruins and the scars of injustice. Somewhere beyond, a battle cry echoed faint yet fierce, a promise that this story was far from over. The wind whispered again, carrying a warning to the night. A sudden flicker of movement at the ridge caught Jack's eye. A group of horsemen, swift and silent, their intent unmistakable. The hunters had come back. The night would not rest easy. Jack guided his horse through the charred remnants of what had once been a bustling Apache village. The acrid smell of burnt wood clung heavily to the dry air, mixing with the metallic scent of blood and smoke. Crumbled huts lay scattered like the bones of the past, silent testimony to the fury that had ravaged this place. The soil beneath was marked with scuffed footprints and patches of trampled grass, some stained dark with fresh blood. He dismounted cautiously, the weight of the silver bracelet tucked safely inside his coat pocket, grounding him to his purpose. The woman crucified beneath the tree had not been forgotten. This place, now hollowed by violence, held the echoes of her last stand, and perhaps answers to the questions burning inside him. Jack's eyes scanned the wasteland until they settled on a lone figure standing amid the ruins. A young woman. Her dark hair knotted with dust and leaves, her eyes sharp and wary. She stood rigid, hands clenched, surveying the destruction with a fierce protectiveness. This was Naya, the sister of the woman who had died so brutally. The whispered rumors and scattered stories of the tribe had spoken of her, a survivor hardened by grief and fury. For a long moment, neither spoke. Words seemed too fragile to bridge the gulf forged by pain and suspicion. Jack let the silence stretch, watching the way her gaze flickered like flames caught in a cold wind, tough, wary, yet searching. Finally, Jack's voice broke the quiet. "I found this," he said, drawing the silver bracelet from his coat, the light flickering off its worn surface. "Your sister wore it. She didn't die alone." Naya's eyes darkened, flicking to the token as if it might shatter in her hands. Her jaw tightened, muscles taut beneath her skin as 1,000 memories pressed behind her gaze. Slowly, almost reluctantly, she reached out, fingers trembling as she wrapped herself around the token. The faintest trace of acknowledgement passed between them, a fragile truce born from shared loss. "They think this ends with her," she said, voice low and sharp, edged with cold fire. "But it only begins." Jack nodded grimly. "The men who did this, they won't stop. They want to finish what they started here." Her eyes narrowed. "The settlers, the ranchers, the lawmen who turn a blind eye. They see us as ghosts to be hunted." My sister's death was a warning. A breeze stirred the dust, swirling it into lazy spirals across the ravaged ground. From the shadows beyond, faint cries and distant footsteps echoed, a reminder that the threat had not yet passed. Jack's hand instinctively hovered near the handle of his revolver, senses taut as a bowstring. Naya turned toward the scattered huts, voice hardening with determination. "We've been broken, but not beaten. The tribe will rise again, if we survive tonight." Jack's gaze flickered to the darkening horizon, where smoke coiled like a serpent into the fading light. "There are signs of others being hunted," he said, voice low. "Footprints, ambushes, the violence spreads." She met his eyes, the weight of that truth settling between them. "Which means they know we're not alone. They're closing in." The ruined village around them seemed to hold its breath, the brittle silence hanging heavy like a shroud. Time pressed forward relentlessly. Every second was a gamble, every shadow a potential enemy. Jack stepped closer, voice steady despite the storm inside him. "Your sister left something behind." He reached into his coat and pulled a folded, dirt-streaked letter, unfolding it with care. Plans for peace. She was trying to build a truce between the Apaches and some of the settlers who still had a conscience. Naya's brow furrowed, eyes scanning the worn parchment. "A truce?" she whispered, almost disbelieving. "Among enemies?" Jack's gaze hardened. Hope often wears the face of the impossible. But that's why they killed her. Because she wanted to change the story. A sudden rustling snapped their attention toward the tree line. Both tensed, preparing for aggression. But it was only a pair of boys, skin dirty, eyes wide with a mix of fear and curiosity, emerging cautiously from the thicket. Naya softened slightly. "They escaped the attack," she murmured. The boys carried hurried whispers of the fate awaiting them all. "The settlers are gathering," one said, voice barely audible. "They want to sweep the remaining villages." Jack clenched his jaw, fists curling tightly. "Then we don't have time to waste." He looked back to Naya, the weight of their alliance settling firmly between them. "I didn't come here by chance. I want to help you fight this. Your sister's death, your people's suffering. They won't be in vain." She studied him, searching behind his rugged exterior for something real, a sign that he was more than another threat to survive. Finally, she nodded, but it was a nod filled with caution, resolve, and the bitter taste of hard lessons learned. "We fight like our lives depend on it," she said, voice steady. "Because they do." The sun sank behind distant hills, bleeding its last light across a landscape scarred by hate and hope tangled in the same soil. As twilight deepened, figures emerged silently from the shadows, horses' hooves muffled by the dusty earth. The patrol returning, closer than either dared admit. Jack and Naya moved swiftly toward the heart of the village's ruin, readying for the confrontation they both knew was inevitable. The night would weigh heavy with danger and the smell of blood yet spilled. And as the first horse's shadow fell across the broken earth, Jack's thoughts were icy clear. This fight was far from over. The local sheriff, a man whose very shadow seemed to ooze corruption, watched from the darkened porch of the weathered saloon as Jack and Naya moved beneath the skeletal trees. His eyes, sharp and cold, surveyed the ravaged village, with a cynical grin lurking beneath a weathered mustache. He was the architect behind the relentless violence cloaking the land in blood and fear. A man who wore his racism like armor and his power like a weapon. Jack could feel the poisonous sting of the sheriff's presence, even from a distance. His reputation whispered through the dry winds that carried desolation. Each cruel act against the Apaches was a carefully orchestrated message, and the sheriff was the maestro. But today, the song was changing. Jack's resolve was a stone set against this mounting tide. As twilight deepened, Jack and Naya sought allies among the scattered survivors. The ruins echoed with memories, whispers of laughter, replaced by silence, hopeful prayers, drowned under ash. They moved cautiously, sharing stories of loss and whispers of rebellion. Naya's voice was steady but fierce when she spoke, cutting through the heavy air. "We can't wait for justice to come unbidden," she said, eyes narrowing beneath the fading light. "We need to show them we will not be erased." Jack nodded. "The sheriff's patrols grow bolder. They want us broken, one by one." Suddenly, a chilling sound snapped the fragile calm, a whistle, sharp and signaling doom. Shadows shifted at the tree line. Armed men, the sheriff's enforcers, burst from concealment like vultures circling carrion. Chaos exploded. Jack drew his revolver, a steady hand that hid countless storms. Naya moved like a shadow herself, weaving between the broken huts, her eyes blazing defiance. Bullets tore the air. Cries of pain and anger collided with the creaking timber of collapsing walls. Amid the fury, Jack fought to shield Naya, deflecting a brutal blow meant to silence her voice. The guard who struck was a snarled beast of hatred, but Jack's years of survival hardened his arms. The two clashed, fiercely, while others scrambled to protect what little remained. Breath ragged, Jack caught Naya's eye, a silent command to hold fast. She darted toward a smoking embankment, dragging a wounded warrior who had stood by her side. His blood seeped into the cracked earth, a grim testament to the day's cruelty. The battle waned, the men retreating as the last light bled from the sky. The village lay in ruin, scars deeper than shattered wood or scorched earth. Pain wove through the survivors, but beneath it burned an ember of resistance reborn. Naya knelt beside her fallen warrior, her fingers steady despite the tremor in her heart. "He fought so we might live," she whispered, eyes glistening in the fading dusk. Jack's gaze turned cold and sharp. "This isn't over. Not by a long shot." A breathless silence stretched between them, heavy with loss and unspoken promises. Yet hope clung stubbornly, like the stubborn desert blooms that thrived against all odds. As darkness seeped into every corner, Naya's voice broke the quiet. "My sister, she was promised to a man of power and influence, someone beyond these hills." Jack's jaw tightened. "A senator, they say. That's why this cruelty hides beneath layers of law and silence." Her fists clenched in the dirt, nails digging into the earth like defiance incarnate. "We're fighting not just survival now, but the twisted roots of corruption." The wind sighed through the burnt branches, a mournful hymn for the dead and a warning for the living. Suddenly, distant hoofbeats thundered, a swift, hunting rhythm closing in. Jack's hand tightened around his revolver's grip. "They're coming back." Naya's eyes locked on the approaching shadows, her body rigid with readiness. "Then we'll be waiting." Between the ruins and the darkening horizon, the embers of vengeance and hope sparked a fire neither man nor corruption could easily extinguish. The night swallowed the land, but the fight was far from finished. In the flickering shadows beyond the burnt village, Jack and Naya gathered with a tight-knit circle, the remnants of survivors who still clung to hope amid the oppressive weight of grief. The air was thick with smoke and the metallic scent of blood, each breath a reminder of losses too raw to name aloud. Naya's voice cut through the heavy silence, steady but fierce. "My sister was trying to bring peace. A truce, not just for our people, but for those settlers with conscience." Her eyes burned with a resolve born of too many broken promises. She believed there could be another way. Jack nodded slowly, folding the dirt-streaked letter with care as he passed it to another survivor. This was her plan. She reached out, secretly, to some who wanted to end the cycle of hate. But it made her a target. His gaze hardened, dark as the smoldering ruins. A target they wanted silenced forever. Around them, the cracked earth seemed to echo that cruel finality. The village lay shattered, homes broken, spirits battered. But the fire of resistance still smoldered beneath the ash. Suddenly, a cautious rustle stirred nearby. Two thin boys emerged from the brush, faces pale, but eyes sharp with news. They whispered urgently of settlers gathering in force, a ruthless sweep aimed to crush every last sign of Apache life in the surrounding hills. Naya's fists clenched, knuckles white against her worn leather jacket. They believe we can be wiped out like dust in the wind, that we have no will left. Jack's hand hovered near his revolver. We have to be faster, stronger. We don't get a second chance. Quiet murmurs of agreement rippled through the group. Plans began to take shape. Hiding vulnerable families, dispersing scouts to warn neighboring bands. But trust was a fragile currency in these desperate times, and every shadow threatened betrayal. Naya's voice softened for a heartbeat. My sister died with hope in her heart. We owe her more than silence. Jack's eyes met hers, a shared pain bridging their worlds. I didn't ride here looking for another fight. I came with a promise, to honor that hope, to fight alongside you. The sun sank low, painting the sky in bruised purples and blood oranges. Smoke curled lazily into the twilight, carrying with it the bitter scent of a battle yet to come. As darkness closed in, the distant thunder of hooves shattered the fragile calm. Figures emerged, swift and silent, like vultures circling prey. Armed men in the service of the ruthless local power structures, their intent unmistakable. Jack and Naya exchanged a hardened glance. The hunt was far from over. We've been betrayed, Naya muttered through clenched teeth, eyes narrowing. A spy walks among us. Someone close to the village has sold our path to the enemy. A murmur of disbelief and fury swept the survivors. Betrayal carved deeper wounds than any bullet or blade. Jack's jaw tightened. If they think they can break us from within, they've underestimated what this fight means. Naya moved to the front, voice rising with controlled fire. We protect what's left, our people, our honor. No more massacres. The small group steeled themselves, faces set against despair and fury alike. They began preparations, not just to survive, but to resist with every ounce of strength. Jack looked to the horizon, where smoke and moonlight tangled in uneasy alliance. Soon the night would erupt in violence once more, but this time they would meet it head-on. The air hummed with whispered threats and hollow promises of retribution as the shadows deepened. And somewhere in the darkness, the spy's treacherous footsteps drew closer. The acrid smoke hung low over the shattered remnants of the village, curling into the heavy dusk like a serpent weaving through scorched bones. Jack Callahan's boots crunched silently on the cracked earth. As he slowed his pace, eyes scanning the horizon where darkness swallowed the twisted skeletons of burnt huts. The scent of charred timber mixed with the iron tang of fresh blood. The village bore wounds far deeper than splintered wood. Beside him, Naya stood rigid, her gaze piercing the twilight. Shadows. The rigid set of her jaw held an unyielding edge, tempered by grief but sharpened with the resolve of a warrior who had faced too many losses. Her hand tightened around the silver bracelet, the only tangible piece of her sister left untouched by hatred. It gleamed faintly, a silent testament to a defiance that had cost her sister's life. They came brutal. Naya's voice was low, yet fierce, cutting through the brittle silence like a blade. They tore through the village, hunting any who dared stand. My people, they fought, but their numbers faltered. She swallowed hard, though her eyes remained steely and unblinking. This was no random raid. It was a purge. Jack nodded, his gaze darkening with grim understanding. The signs were unmistakable. Footprints, stamped into the soft soil, revealed a savage sweep, while broken arrows and charred remains bore witness to the ferocity they'd faced. The settlers, Jack said quietly, they're not just hunting survivors. They want to erase everything. A sudden gust carried the distant whine of a coyote's lament, a hollow call that echoed the despair lurking beneath burning embers. Jack's hand instinctively dropped to the revolver, resting against his thigh, the cold metal offering a slender glimmer of control amid chaos. Naya scanned the ruined perimeter. One of our closest warriors. Her voice caught briefly before she steadied herself, kneeling beside a fallen figure. The man's breathing was shallow, crimson tinting the dust beneath him. He took a bullet meant for me, for the future we hope to build. Jack crouched beside her, his rough fingers brushing the warrior's gray-streaked hair back. The man's eyes fluttered open, anguish softened by fleeting relief. "Fight," Jack urged with unwavering conviction. Not just to survive, but to keep her dream alive. The faintest flicker crossed the old warrior's face. A spark kindled one last time. From the shadows, the ruined homes whispered with half-forgotten memories. Laughter drowned by grief, hopes shattered like broken glass. But in the heart of that ruin, a fragile ember of resistance refused to die. Jack's gaze hardened. This is no longer just survival. It's a fight for justice. His voice vibrated with a quiet rage. The weight of years spent walking a lawless land, fueling his every word. The men who did this hide behind power and silence. They think their cruelty is beyond reach. Naya's eyes narrowed, a fury curling in their depths. My sister was promised to a man of influence, she said, voice low but resolute. A senator, someone shielded by laws that protect the corrupt. That's why they've gotten away with murder. Jack's fists clenched tightly into his coat. Political corruption, blood in the dust. The same poison in different veins. His gaze drifted toward the darkening horizon, where plume after plume of smoke marked the scars of hatred, stretching beyond this place. Suddenly, the pounding beat of hooves shattered the tense stillness. Shadows danced frantic across the jagged earth, riding closer with relentless purpose. Jack's muscles coiled, eyes narrowing on the retreating shapes, the local militia, returning with ruthless intent. Naya stood tall, her silhouette carved sharp against the fading sky. "They're coming back," she said softly, voice steady but fierce, ready to finish what they started. Jack's hand tightened on the revolver's grip. "Then we won't give them the chance." The two met each other's eyes, a pact forged in loss, pain, and an unyielding will to resist. Around them, the village lay in ruins, but within its broken bones stirred the beginnings of a fight that would echo beyond these hills. As the first figures emerged from the gathering shadows, their faces set with cruel intent, the night swallowed the land whole, heavy with the promise of bloodshed yet to come. And somewhere beneath the weight of stars, Naya unearthed a piece of terrible truth. Her sister's betrothed was not merely a local tyrant, but a senator whose reach stretched deep into the heart of the land's corruption, explaining why the killers walked free. The wind whispered through the burnt branches, carrying her words like a vow. A senator. The plan was dangerous, but the stakes had never been higher. Jack and Naya sat beneath the skeletal branches of a gnarled oak on the edge of the ruined village, their faces shadowed by dusk, minds racing with a daring resolve. The evidence they had gathered, the letter promising peace, the silver bracelet, the scars of the attack, had to reach the town. Only through exposure could justice tremble its first uncertain steps against the creeping corruption. Naya's dark eyes burned with fierce determination. "We can't just wait for law to find its way here," she whispered, glancing toward the horizon where smoke still curled like cursed fingers over the dry earth. "The sheriff's men and his militia control the town. They bury truth beneath their money and hate." Jack's grip tightened around his coat, concealing the revolver resting close beneath. "Then we bring the truth to the surface ourselves. The sheriff's corruption won't shield him from the light forever." His voice was low, voiced with the weight of years spent treading a deadly path across these unforgiving lands. Between them, a small circle of Apache warriors and a few wary settlers nodded, their faces drawn tight with suspicion. And hope tangled like barbed wire. Among the newcomers was Elias, the young deputy whose courage had not yet been dulled by the grime of the frontier. He emerged as their tentative but vital ally, a fragile beacon in the storm. "We move at nightfall," Elias said quietly, voice carrying a calm urgency. "The shadows will be our shield. If we move fast, we catch them unaware." Jack scanned the group, eyes finding Naya's unwavering gaze. "And the others in town? How many can we trust?" His question hung heavy in the air. "Few," Naya replied with a bitter edge. "But even a single spark can start a fire." They set their plans with clipped words and silent nods, mapping the route to the town's dusty heart, where power whispered in saloon smoke and crooked smiles. The letter folded carefully inside Jack's jacket was their lifeline, a call to accountability written in the hope of bloodied hands. As night thickened and stars whispered cold truths, the small caravan set out, horses' hooves muffled against the dry earth. The bitter wind carried the scent of char and sorrow behind them. Eyes burned bright with resolve, hearts hammered with dread and fierce hope. A moon slivered thin, casting silver threads through the silhouetted trees, when two shapes suddenly appeared on the trail ahead, figures cloaked in dark dust, their horses snorting and pawing the dirt. Jack's hand twitched near his revolver, sensing the weight of the moment, before words tumbled between the riders. Elias's eyes narrowed. Militia. They can't be far behind. Naya's breath hitched, lips pressed into a hard line. If they catch us with the proof, it's over. The senator's men won't just seize evidence, they'll bury us all. Jack's gaze sharpened, the grim promise settling like stone in his chest. Then we're walking straight into their trap. The approaching riders slowed, forming a small patrol under the half-melted stars. Their leader's dust-dark eyes gleamed with cold menace. Word had spread. The mission was known. "Hold tight," Jack muttered, shifting in the saddle, muscles taut as steel cables. "We can't lose this." In the fragile silence that stretched like a wire ready to snap, the first shot cracked, a sharp, deadly crack that shattered the night air and flung them into chaos. The convoy scattered, horses rearing and hooves thudding like thunder over brittle terrain. Bullets whizzed, kicking up showers of dust and shattered stones. Jack's revolver roared with ruthless precision, each pull a prayer for survival and justice. Beside him, Naya urged her horse forward, eyes fierce with desperation. "Protect the letter," she shouted into the bitter wind, voice sharp over the din. But the militia was relentless, men fueled by greed and fear, hunting the bearing of truth like it was a wolf in the night. Elias faltered under a hail of gunfire, throwing himself between an attacker and Naya. A fierce struggle erupted, the calculated savagery of frontier lawlessness stripped bare in the blackness. Jack's heart pounded as his mind raced through every survival instinct carved into him by years on the edge. Their plan was unraveling, the mission slipping closer to disaster. The senator's shadow loomed, a storm of power and violence set to snuff out the flicker of hope they carried. And then, cutting through the chaos, a voice pierced the night, a cry both urgent and familiar. "Hold! Enough!" The riders paused, revolvers lowered, but eyes wild. The voice belonged to a woman, tall and steady, atop a restless horse, her presence commanding an uneasy respect. A colonist who'd once vowed to side with justice instead of cruelty. "She's with us," Jack called out, urgency lacing his words. "We carry proof, truth the town needs." For a suspended moment, the night clenched its breath. But the danger was far from over. As shadows loomed and horsemen circled like vultures ready to strike, the mission hung by a thread, the fate of justice slipping beneath the harsh frontier moon. The carriage with the evidence was trapped, and the militia's ruthless leader revealed himself at last. The very man to whom Naya's sister had been promised. Slow, cruel smiles curved his lips as his hand rested on the butt of a rifle, the promise of violence and betrayal coiling in his gaze. The fight for truth was just beginning. Dust hung heavy in the late afternoon air, settling over the cracked ground like a shroud, as Jack Callahan and Naya crouched behind a weathered boulder, eyes fixed on the approaching mass of horsemen. The militia's dust-licked silhouettes wavered across the barren ridge, a gathering storm of cruelty poised to crush the fragile embers of resistance. Jack's fingers brushed the handle of his revolver beneath his coat, heart steady despite the pounding urgency in his chest. Every beat was a warning echoing from the past. A grim reminder that these men carried not only weapons, but the weight of sanctioned hate. Beside him, Nea's clenched fists trembled, the silver bracelet still wrapped in her palm, a token heavy with sorrow and defiance. "They're coming for us," she whispered, gaze burning like embers against the dying light. Jack nodded, grit grinding silently between his teeth. "They want to finish what they started, make our fight end with." Fire and blood, smoke coiled in the distance, a cruel signature of destruction marking their path. The village lay in ruin behind them, skeletal remains of what once breathed life into Apache hopes, a memory scorched into the earth. But where the land was broken, the spirit of those who remained was sharper than ever, steeling itself against the judgment of death. Nia rose from her crouch, eyes narrowing against the sun, dipping low and bleeding orange across her weathered face. "We have little time," she said, voice brittle but firm. "The men who attacked know that your presence means trouble. They speak in whispers about the rebel with no name." Jack's jaw tightened. "I'm not here for revenge. I'm here because those men, your sisters, killers, think they can silence the truth. That this place, this people, can be erased without reckoning." A bitter wind curled between them, carrying the faint but unmistakable scent of gunpowder and sweat. They were no longer alone. From the shadowed tree line, figures stirred, a mix of warriors and weary settlers who survived the onslaught, faces carved by loss, eyes flickering with cautious hope. Nia's voice rose then, cutting through the tense air. "We gather, not because we seek war, but because we want to live, to protect what remains from the hands of hate." Jack scanned their faces. Among them moved Elias, the young deputy whose courage had become a fragile banner against the dark tide, a man clinging to justice in a land ruled by greed and fear. Their quiet alliance was a sliver of light in a wilderness clawed by shadows. "Plan is simple," Jack murmured, voice low enough for the wind to swallow. "We hold this ground as long as we can. Delay them. Buy time for the town to see what's hidden beneath their sheriff's lies." Nia's eyes darkened with resolve. "This fight isn't just for our lives," she said. "It's for the story of a sister who dared to say no. For every soul crushed beneath the weight of a lie." The militia's drums thundered in the distance, boots pounding hard against thirsty earth, a relentless tide of violence poised to descend. Jack's breath tightened. All they had was resolve, and the bitter promise of justice braided with blood. Suddenly, a trumpet of voices shattered the fragile quiet. The militia surged forward, emboldened by numbers and fury, their faces twisted with cruel anticipation. Jack's revolver barked, a sharp staccato that split the air. Bullets tore through brittle branches and rattled the shattered earth. Nia moved like a shadow, weaving through the ragged remnants of the village, her fierce eyes locking on those who sought to bring oblivion. Her shouts rose, rallying broken hearts to fight with desperate fire. Amid the clash, Jack found himself face to face with a hulking brute, the militia leader's second in command, his sneer a mirror of the corruption at the heart of this land. Their guns spat venom, hands grappling with raw need to survive. The fight was brutal. every strike a dance with death, written in sweat and grit. A soldier lunged toward Naya, blade glinting cold as twilight. Jack's shout sliced through the chaos, meeting the clawing desperation in her eyes. He intercepted the blow, pain rasping up his arm, but fury sharpening his focus. Together, they fought back to back, a solitary fortress against the storm. The militia's advance faltered under fierce resistance, their momentum broken by the raw desperation of those who refused to yield. But the price was written in blood. Warriors fell, their cries swallowed by the darkening sky. Breath heavy, Jack caught Naya's eye. "We can't keep this up much longer. They'll circle back with reinforcements." His voice was gravel and steel. She nodded once, grim and unwavering. Then, "We hold them here, for every fallen, for her." From the shadowed edge of the battlefield, a rider lowered a worn leather hat, revealing a grim smile sharp as a knife. An emissary of the senator, promised to Naya's sister. His eyes burned with a cold hunger, a predator sizing the final stake. He raised a pistol, voice dripping poison. "End this now, or every one of you dies." The world seemed to tighten, the dust curling in slow motion around the inevitability of violence. Jack's gaze locked with Naya's, a silent vow passing between them, fierce and unbroken. The night closed in, heavy with the scent of gunpowder and blood, shadows devouring the light. And in the gathering darkness, the senator himself emerged from the smoke, his presence swelling the promise of death and dread. Their battle, far from over, teetering on the brink of chaos and betrayal. The chilling silence that hung over the scorched village was broken only by the distant pounding of hooves. A relentless drum signaling the return of the militia. Jack Callahan crouched low behind the shattered remains of a collapsed wall, every muscle taut, revolver gripped tightly. Beside him, Naya's dark eyes burned with fierce resolve. The silver bracelet, clutched firmly in her hand, a symbol of loss and defiance etched forever into their souls. "They're coming back," she whispered, voice steady but edged with fire. The smoke-blackened sky behind her seemed to close in, pressing upon the broken earth like a shroud. Jack nodded, grimly. "No more running, no more hiding. We face them here, or we don't face them at all." Around them, the survivors ready themselves, the weary warriors, the few loyal settlers, and Elias, the young deputy whose idealism still fought hard against the corruption creeping through the town. Their faces were etched with grief and determination alike. A fragile truce forged in the heat of suffering. As the militia surged into view, their dust swirling like a storm unleashed. Jack's voice cut through the tension. "Hold your ground. Protect what's left." The first volley of gunfire shattered the silence, bullets tearing through dry wood and rending dust-laden air. Naya moved like a shadow, weaving deftly between the ruins, her eyes locked on the faces twisted by hatred. She screamed a rallying cry that pierced the chaos, fueling the resolve of those who would not yield. Jack found himself locked in brutal combat with a towering enforcer, the sheriff's second in command, a man carved from cruelty and swollen with corrupt power. Their pistols spat fire, each round a desperate plea for survival. When a blade lunged toward Naya, Jack's shout rang out. He threw himself between her and the attack, pain lancing his arm, but fury sharpening his focus. Back to back, they formed an island of defiance amid the storm. The militia pressed hard, their numbers threatening to overwhelm, but the fierce resistance corroded their momentum. Each fallen warrior only stoked the fire in the hearts of the living. The battle raged raw and unforgiving beneath the blood-red sky. Suddenly, from the smoke and shadows, a grim figure emerged, an emissary of the senator, the very man to whom Naya's sister had been promised. His cold eyes gleamed with predatory calculation. Raising a pistol, he barked, "End this now, or every one of you dies." Jack met his gaze, steel in his voice. "Justice doesn't bow to threats. Not here." The standoff froze the air, time compressing to the weight of a single breath. Around them, the tortured earth held the memory of too many tragedies, but also the stubborn spark of resistance. Without warning, Elias, the young deputy, broke from cover, his voice ringing out to the desperate crowd. "We have the truth, the letter, the proof of their crimes. The people must see it." That sliver of hope ignited the crowd's heart. The townsfolk, long complicit through silence, began to murmur, questioning, conflicted between fear and the faint flicker of justice. As factions hesitated, Naya urged her people forward. "For my sister, for every one of us." The senator's face twisted in rage as his men faltered, the fragile power they wielded cracking under the weight of exposure. Cornered by a rising tide of voices demanding accountability, the militia's grim facade began to crumble. With grim determination, Jack seized the moment. "This ends today. No more blood spilled to hide lies." The senator snarled, but found no allies in the shifting crowd. His influence weakened as the truth unspooled like a banner. In the dry wind, justice, though slow and imperfect, had taken its first tentative step. As twilight faded into night, the firing ceased, and an uneasy quiet settled over the battered village. The survivors gathered among the ruins, their bodies weary, but spirits unbroken. Naya knelt at the foot of the crucified tree's remains, the earth still scorched and raw beneath her fingers. "She was brave," Naya said softly, voice trembling yet resolute. "She drew a line in the sand, with her life, a line we won't cross." Jack rested a steady hand on her shoulder. Her fight wasn't in vain. It awoke something in these hills, a call to stand, even when hope feels like dust. The silver bracelet gleamed faintly in the pale moonlight, a testament to defiance etched in blood and courage. Days later, word spread slowly but steadily. The senator was under investigation, compelled to answer for his crimes. The sheriff was stripped of authority, his dark reign diminished by the hard truths laid bare. The city's crooked power began to unravel, piece by piece. In the village's heart, Naya and Jack surveyed the fragile beginnings of rebuilding, smoke rising from new fires, voices raised in cautious laughter. Lives tentatively reclaiming ground lost to violence and fear. Their gazes met, a silent understanding passing between them. The road ahead was long, the wounds deep, but the seed of resistance had taken root. The land, scarred but not broken, held the promise of renewal. I don't know what tomorrow brings, Jack admitted quietly, but I do know this: as long as we remember, as long as we stand together, the darkness will never win. Naya nodded, the first faint smile touching her lips. We fight for those who cannot, for a future where no one dies for love or justice. Together they turned to the rising sun, the dawn painting the vast western sky with strokes of hope and possibility. The frontier was harsh, its shadows long, but in their hearts blazed a new fire, unyielding, fierce, eternal. The story of the crucified woman had carved a path beyond pain, a legacy of courage that whispered through the winds of a restless land. And so, amid shattered bones and burning embers, a new chapter began.